The rain in Chennai was coming down harder now. Sundar stood at the edge of the bus stop, water seeping into his sandals. He was 15. His shirt clung to his back, heavy with the rain, but he didn't move. His books were safe inside a plastic bag, the same bag he had used for 2 years. The city was loud, cars honking, people shouting, but Sundar's mind was somewhere else, somewhere quieter. His father hadn't spoken much that morning. The mood in the house was heavy, like the clouds above. The electricity bill was due, and Sundar knew what that meant. He had seen his mother sit in silence the night before, staring at the candle, thinking, not crying, just thinking. They wouldn't light the fan tonight, and maybe not for the next few nights. But Sundar didn't complain. He never did. He watched as the bus came rolling in, spitting mud behind its tires. He climbed on quickly, squeezing. Between strangers, the seat by the window was taken, so he held onto the bar, his body swaying with every bump in the road. School was his escape. But not in the way it was for most kids. For Sundar, school was not about fun or games. It was survival. It was where he could be more than the boy from the narrow house behind the textile shop. It was where he was first called brilliant. It was where teachers looked at him like he mattered. He remembered the first time someone said, this boy, Mr. Kumar said, holding Sundar's notebook in the air, has a mind sharper than any I've seen. The class had laughed. Sundar had looked down, his ears burning. But inside, something had shifted. Now, years later. He still carried that moment with him. As the bus rumbled forward. Sundar closed his eyes and imagined the future. A place where rain didn't mean wet books. A place where his mother smiled more often. A place where he could build things, change things. He didn't know how yet, but he believed. When he arrived at school, the hallways were already buzzing. Final exams were 2 weeks away. Everyone was nervous. Sundar, a voice called out. It was Neha. She was in his science class. Did you finish the circuits assignment? He nodded and handed her a page. She looked at it wide-eyed. You did the whole thing? He shrugged. Thank you, she said, softer now. You single quotes read. Amazing, you know? He didn't answer. He wasn't good at compliments. The day passed quickly. Lessons, labs, lunch under the neem tree. The usual. But everything changed after the last bell. The principal walked into class, her face serious. Students, she said, we need to talk. There had been an accident. Sundar felt his heart drop. A student from class 10 was hit by a bike outside the gate. People gasped. He's in the hospital now. We're praying. They didn't say the name. Sundar's hands were cold. He had a brother in class 10. His mind raced. Was it him? He didn't wait. He ran out of the classroom. Down the stairs, past the guards. His heart pounding. He reached the hospital in 30 minutes, running most of the way. When he reached the emergency room, he saw his father, standing, still, like stone. Appa. Sundar whispered. His father looked at him, then pointed toward a bench. His brother was there, sitting, bruised, but alive. Sundar ran to him, hugged him tightly. The smell of antiseptic was strong. I'm okay, his brother said. I'm okay. Sundar nodded, tears in his eyes. It was the first time he'd ever felt what it was like to almost lose someone. And it changed him. Later that night, at home, when the candles flickered and the ceiling fan sat still, Sundar made a silent promise. He would build a life so safe, so stable, that no one he loved would ever have to worry again. He didn't know how, not yet, but he would. Years passed. He got a scholarship, then another. He left India for the first time with a suitcase of borrowed clothes and a dream that was too big for anyone back home to really understand. America was cold. Everything felt too fast, too loud. But Sundar stayed quiet, watched, learned, and then slowly began to build. He found work, stayed up nights fixing problems, helping teams, always listening more than he spoke. People liked him. They said he was humble, thoughtful, smart. And then came Google. It started with a job interview. He Didn't expect much, but they saw something in him, and he saw something in them. He rose quietly, slowly, until one day, people were calling him one of the most important voices in tech, but he never changed. Still called his mother every Sunday. Still carried the same quiet sadness in his eyes. When he thought of Chennai's rains, then came the interview. The one that no one forgot. The reporter leaned forward. Mr. Pichai, she said, you've led one of the biggest companies in the world. You've changed billions of lives. But tell us, what's your biggest regret? Sundar looked down, and then, after a long pause, he said something that no one expected. I regret what happened that night in the San Francisco office. I regret not picking up the phone. And I regret what it cost me. The room went silent. The reporter blinked. What happened? She asked and Sundar said quietly, everything. Asterisk, the miscalc. Silence after Sundar's answer stretched long and deep. The reporter didn't speak. No one did. Cameras kept rolling, but the room felt still, frozen in a moment that was more than just an interview. Sundar sat there, his hands folded, eyes fixed on something far away. Not the past exactly, but something just outside memory. Something closer, sharper, still breathing. It was 2009, he said at last, his voice low. I had been working almost every night for weeks. Our team was building a product we thought would change everything. He paused, as if remembering the weight of those days. The late nights under artificial lights. The whiteboards filled with sketches. The smell of stale coffee. He had been so focused, so consumed, that the outside world had started to blur. Time melted into work. Faces into emails. That night, he said, I was in the office. It was close to midnight. The building was mostly empty. The only sound was the humming of servers down the hall. I was rewriting a document for the 5th time. I wanted it perfect. I wanted everything perfect. He looked down, his fingers resting on the table in front of him, motionless. Then my phone rang. He took a breath. I looked at the screen. It was my cousin in Chennai. Now, we didn't talk often. He's a good man. Quiet. Works hard. But we weren't close. Not really. Still, I saw his name and something told me to pick up. Something inside me said, take this call. He paused again. But I didn't. His voice had a tightness. Now, not regret alone. Something deeper. Like guilt, but shaped by time. I told myself I'd call back later. I had too much to do. I was already behind. I just couldn't afford to stop. Not Ben. He looked up, eyes meeting the reporters for a second, then moving past her. Into the silence, 20 minutes later, he called again. I saw it, felt annoyed, thought what could be so urgent. And I silenced the phone. There was a long pause. The kind of pause that holds more than words can say he never called a third time. For a moment, the room felt colder. The next morning, Sundar said, voice barely a whisper now, I got an email. It had just one sentence. He looked away. Your mother has collapsed. Call immediately. The air left the room. The reporter leaned in, her own hands shaking slightly. I called, Sundar said. My hands were shaking. I couldn't breathe. I called and someone else answered. Not my father, not my brother, just a neighbor. He said they were at the hospital. She was in the IQ. They didn't know if she would make it. His face was unreadable now, but his voice cracked just once. My cousin, he called to tell me. When she fainted, he didn't wait for an ambulance. He carried her into his car himself, drove like a madman through the traffic. He called because they didn't know if she would make it, and they wanted me to speak to her. In case it was the last time. The reporter covered her mouth with one hand. The camera operators stopped pretending to be invisible. No one moved. I got on a flight that day. First plane out of San Francisco. I didn't care about the project. I didn't care about deadlines. All I wanted was to see her. To tell her I was sorry. To tell her I should have picked up. He paused, his breath uneven now. She survived. A breath of relief passed through the room, but it changed something in her. And in me, the doctor said she had been carrying too much stress. Too much silence. She had been trying not to worry me even when the signs were there. Her chest pains, her headaches. She thought I was too busy. Too far. His voice grew quiet again. That night, she waited for my voice, and I didn't answer. He rubbed his eyes for a moment. Not wiping tears, exactly. Just trying to see clearly. I sat by her bedside for 3 days. She woke up on the second. Smiled when she saw me. I remember she said something out. Never forget. His mouth moved, but no words came for a moment. Then finally, she said, "You work so hard, Beta." I just didn't want to interrupt. He closed his eyes. And I thought, how many mothers say that? How many parents stay quiet, hold their pain, because they think they'll be a burden? The silence in the room was now filled with something else. Not just sadness, something more powerful. Recognition, empathy, a feeling shared by every soul. Who has ever been too late, too busy, too distracted to answer a call that mattered? Asterisk. That's my regret, Sundar said. Not that I missed a product launch. Not that I failed a deadline. But that I made my mother believe her voice didn't matter in that moment, because I didn't answer. The reporter had tears in her eyes now, and what happened after? She asked softly. Sundar nodded, as if expecting the question. Asterisk. She got better, slowly, but I changed after that. I stopped sleeping in the office. I started calling more often. I put family in my calendar, as if it was a meeting I couldn't miss. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to remember. What mattered? He looked into the camera now, eyes steady. Success, he said, is not what they tell you. It's not titles, not stock, not awards. It's whether the people who love you still feel seen by you, still feel heard. He leaned back, voice quiet again. I got a second chance. Most people don't. He didn't need to say more. Everyone in that room was thinking the same thing. About their own missed calls, their own regrets, their own silent goodbyes. And then, just when it seemed the story had found its peace, the reporter asked one last question. But you said that night cost you something more. More than just guilt. What did it cost? Sundar looked at her. And this time, his voice changed. It cost me someone else. He said. A pause. Someone I never told anyone about. The camera zoomed slightly closer. The room still as glass. Her name was Maya. A name from the past. One word. Enough to shift the story again. And then the screen faded to black. Asterisk. The girl by the photocopy shop, the name seemed to echo after he said it. Maya. Just 4 letters, but it carried the weight of something long buried. Not forgotten now. Sundar was not the kind of man who forgot easily, but hidden. Folded away like an old letter you don't have the heart to open again. The reporter sat still, her eyes locked on his face. Who was she? She asked, though something in her voice suggested she already understood the importance of the name. Sundar didn't answer right away. His fingers traced an invisible line on the edge of the table. It was the kind of gesture someone makes when they're slowly lowering the walls they've kept up for years. Before Google, he said quietly, before Stanford, before Silicon Valley, there was a small street in Chennai, dusty, crowded, noisy with life. And on that street, next to the Paddy's tea stall, there was a small, broken-down photocopy shop. That's where she was. His voice softened, not in sadness, but something more delicate. Memory. I used to pass by it every morning on the way to school. And again every evening after the bus dropped me off at the end of the lane. For months, I never looked inside. But one day the power went out in my house and I needed to copy my science notes before the exam. He smiled faintly. So I went inside and she was there. The reporter leaned forward. The cameras hummed softly. The audience, millions of future viewers, would not blink. She was sitting behind the counter, fixing the machine. Not typing, not taking money, fixing. With her sleeves rolled up in toner on her hands. His smile grew, just for a second. I thought she worked there. I found out later it was her father's shop. He'd been sick that week, so she was filling in. She looked up when I came in, and for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me like I wasn't just another boy with messy hair and borrowed shoes. He paused, that small smile fading into something more quiet. We talked, just small things. School, books, the bus routes. I found reasons to go back. Papers I didn't need copied. Questions I already knew the answers to. Sometimes I would just stand outside and pretend I was waiting for someone, just to catch a glimpse of her through the glass. And she knew? The reporter asked gently. Sundar nodded once. She knew. His voice dropped lower. Maya wasn't like anyone else I had met. She didn't dream of going to America or building billion-dollar things. She dreamed of opening a library in our neighborhood. A real one, with proper shelves and quiet corners, and a window seat. She said kids needed books more than they needed screen time. This was before phones became everything. He breathed in slowly. She would lend me novels, old ones missing pages. And I would sit under the streetlight outside my house, reading until the mosquitoes forced me to stop. Did you love her? The reporter asked, not as a journalist now, but as a human being caught in the tenderness of a story. Sundar didn't flinch. Double quotes, yes. He said, I did, but I never told her. His fingers tightened slightly on the table. I was afraid. Afraid she'd think it was foolish. Afraid it would make things harder between us. Afraid it would become another weight on her already tired shoulders. Her father's health was failing. Her family struggled. Every time I tried to say something, she would talk about something simple. The new issue of the comic magazine, or how the chai vendor down the street always gave her extra sugar. His voice grew quieter, and then I left. The reporter raised an eyebrow. You mean for Stanford? He nodded. I got the scholarship. The dream. The letter came in the mail, and everyone in the neighborhood came to see it. My mother cried. My father tried not to. Maya was the last one I told. What did she say? He looked up, and for a moment his eyes were glassy. She said, You were never going to stay here, Sundar. You were always meant to build things in places I'll only read about. The silence stretched again. I promised I'd write, he said. And I did, for a while. The reporter spoke softly now. So, what happened? Sundar stared ahead. Life, he said. New city. New demands. I was poor, scared, lonely, and then busy. Always busy. I would write letters and forget to send them. Sometimes I'd write only the first line, and then throw the page away. Months passed, then years. Did she stop writing? He shook his head. She wrote every few weeks. Short letters, kind, never angry, just updates. The monsoon was late. Her father's cough got worse. A child from the neighborhood won a poetry contest. He stopped for a moment, and then one day, the letters stopped. The reporter didn't speak. I thought she had moved on, Sundar said. I told myself that. I buried it under everything else, deadlines, grades, projects. But it stayed with me. His hand opened slightly. In 2009, just a few hours before my cousin called about my mother, I found one of her letters in an old notebook, unopened. It had been there for years. It had her handwriting, her name. His voice trembled just slightly now. I took out my phone. I found the number she once wrote at the bottom of a page, and I typed it in. A pause. But I didn't press call. Why not? He lifted up, eyes raw, because I thought, what if she doesn't remember me the same way I remember her? What if she's moved on? What if I opened something she closed years ago? He shook his head, and then the call came, the one about my mother. I never called Maya. Did you try again later? He looked down. I went back to Chennai 3 months later, after everything settled. I went to her shop. It was gone. Just a metal shutter. Closed. The sign had rusted. The neighbors said the family had moved. Her father had passed. They didn't know where she'd gone. He rubbed the back of his neck. I spent days walking. The old streets, asking, searching. But no one knew. It was like she had been a dream, someone only I had seen. The reporter looked down, too, lost in the weight of it all. And you never saw her again? Sundar's voice broke then. Just a little. No. A long silence. No music, no camera shift. Just truth. But sometimes, he said, when I walk into a bookstore in a new country, I look for her. I imagine her standing there, holding a book, ready to recommend something. Sometimes when I speak to young engineers, I tell them build things that matter. But never forget the people who gave you your first stories. He swallowed hard. Because it's not just what you create in life, it's what you leave behind in the hearts of others. The reporter, her voice shaky, whispered, "And if you could speak to her now?" He closed his eyes for a second. "I would tell her I still carry her letters, all of them. I would tell her I still remember the smell of the toner on her hands, the way she believed in books more than anything else. And I would say I'm sorry." He looked up again. "I would say thank you, and I'm sorry." And then quietly the screen dimmed, but just before it faded completely, Sundar added one more line, but that's not the end of the story. Something happened in London years later, and it changed everything. Asterisk, the library on the Thames. Air in London that day was crisp and grey, a kind of overcast that softened everything. Sundar had landed the night before for a technology summit. The schedule was tight. Breakfast with investors, interviews, keynote presentations. His assistant had handed him an itinerary with no white space. But in the early hours of the morning, before the city woke fully, he had found himself wandering. It wasn't planned. He had simply walked out of the hotel with a coffee and no direction. His mind was noisy. Not with data or deadlines, but with echoes. Old memories. The interview. Maya's name still lingering in his thoughts, like a song you couldn't quite turn off. He crossed a quiet street, the damp stone shining under his shoes, and made his way along the Thames. People jogged past him, heads down, earbuds in. He didn't pay attention. He kept walking, as if pulled by something unseen. And that's when he saw the building. It wasn't large. It didn't look important. No flashy signs. No advertisements. Just an old red brick corner with ivy climbing up one side and a single wooden board above the door that read East Bridge Community Library. Asterisk. He would later try to explain why he went in. He couldn't. Maybe it was the word library. Maybe it was the warm light glowing through the windows. Maybe it was something else entirely. Asterisk. He stepped inside and the smell hit him first. Paper, wood, and something faintly floral. It was quiet, but not silent. The kind of quiet where you could hear a page turn, a whisper float. A life-breathed. Rows of books stood like tall, gentle guards. A child sat cross-legged in a corner, whispering a story to herself. An old man with trembling fingers searched for a name in a history section. And somewhere in the back, a soft voice laughed. Sundar turned. It wasn't just the laugh that stopped him. It was what came after a voice. Clear, soft, familiar in a way that startled him. He stepped closer, unsure of himself. His heart had begun to race, but his feet kept moving, and then he saw her. She was sitting on the floor with two children, reading from a weathered copy of The Little Prince. Her hair was tied back loosely, a pencil stuck through it. Her sorry was simple, but there was something unmistakable in the way she held the book, like it was made of gold. He froze. Maya. The world blurred. For a moment, he couldn't hear anything but the rushing in his ears. She hadn't changed much. Maybe a few lines around her eyes, maybe a new calmness in the way she moved, but it was her, unmistakably her, and she hadn't seen him yet. He took a step back, unsure. What was he supposed to say? What if he was wrong? What if then she looked up. Their eyes met, and time stopped. No words, no movement, just recognition. Deep, silent recognition. The kind that only happens between two people who never truly left each other. She stood slowly, the book falling closed in her lap. One of the children tugged her sleeve, but she didn't look down. He tried to speak. Maya. He whispered. And she smiled. A small, tired, beautiful smile that broke something open in him. You took your time, she said. Those 4 words hit him harder than anything anyone had ever said. I looked for you, he said, stepping closer, his voice rough with emotion. So did I, she replied. He laughed once, quietly. You're here. In London, she nodded. I moved here 7 years ago. I got a grant to help build community reading spaces. One of them turned into this place. He looked around, still stunned. "You built this?" She nodded again. "Not alone, but yes." He looked back at her, and for the first time in years, he let himself ask the question, "Why didn't you write again?" After ... everything. She hesitated, then sat down on one of the low benches. He followed. "I did," she said. "I sent 2 more letters. The last one I mailed the day I closed my father's shop. But they came back. Wrong address, undeliverable." He closed his eyes. "I moved. I didn't update the post office. I thought..." He stopped himself. "You thought I had forgotten you," she said, not unkindly. He nodded, ashamed. "I never did," he said. "Not a single day." Maya looked at him, then really looked. And something inside her softened. "I was angry for a while," she admitted. "But not because you left. Because you stopped believing you could write to me. Even after all our stories." His throat tightened. "I read your name in the paper last year," she continued. "They called you one of the most powerful men in the world. I thought, power doesn't mean much if it can't help you carry old regrets." He felt his eyes burn. He looked away. "I thought about you every time I picked up a book." He sighed. "Every time I stood in front of a classroom. Every time I saw something worth building." Maya nodded. Double quotes, then build something new, she said. He looked at her. "What do you mean?" She smiled gently. "Not a product. Not a company. Build something human. Call the people you haven't called. Forgive someone. Remember birthdays. Eat lunch slowly. Return letters." He laughed softly, tears now in his eyes. "And what about us?" He asked. Maya paused. Then she said something that felt like a door creaking open. "It's never too late to rebuild a bridge. Even the one you left behind." Just then, a small girl ran up to them, waving a book. "Miss Maya, it's time for..." Story circle. Maya smiled and stood. She looked back at Sundar. "I'll be here tomorrow," she said. "Same time." And then she walked away, sunlight catching the edge of her hair like a final sentence in a chapter not yet finished. Sundar sat there long after she left. He had given 1,000 speeches in his life, addressed the world's brightest minds, but nothing had prepared him for the quiet power of that moment. As he stood to leave, he looked around once more, at the walls filled with books, the shelves filled with stories, the space filled with something deeper than knowledge. And he realized something. This was what Maya had been trying to build all along. Not just a library. A home for memory. A place where the forgotten could be found again. And maybe, just maybe, where 2 lives could begin to write a new story. But just as he reached for the door, his phone buzzed. He looked down. A name flashed across the screen. Rahul Pichai. His younger brother. Sundar's heart skipped. He hadn't heard from Rahul in weeks. He answered quickly. "Rahul?" But the voice on the other end wasn't his brother. It was someone else. And the words they spoke made his knees go weak. "Mr. Pichai, there's been an accident." The long way home voice on the other end of the line was calm, too calm. It was the kind of calm that doesn't soothe, the kind that warns. "Mr. Pichai." The man repeated, "Your brother was in a car accident. He's stable, but unconscious. We need you to speak to the attending physician as soon as possible." For a moment, Sundar couldn't move. He stood at the threshold of the little London library, half inside, half out, his hand still resting on the wooden door. Behind him, he could hear the soft murmur of children reading. Ahead of him, the world stretched gray and cold. His heart beat so loud it almost drowned out the man's voice. "Where is he?" Sundar asked, his throat dry. "Chennai, General." The man replied. He was driving alone. There was a truck. It hit him on the side. Head trauma. Internal bleeding. The doctors have stabilized him, but ... But there's always a but. Sundar gripped the phone tighter. "I'll be on the next flight." He said. The jet roared into the sky 6 hours later. Sundar sat by the window, staring at the clouds below. A tray of untouched food sat in front of him. The screen in the seat back blinked with flight data he didn't care about. His thoughts spun. He had spoken to the doctor briefly before boarding. The injury was serious. The brain had swollen. They wouldn't know the full extent until his brother woke up. If he woke up, Sundar pressed his fingers against his eyes. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Rahul had always been the steady one, the quiet, dependable pillar of their family. While Sundar built software, Rahul ran the family business after their father retired. While Sundar flew to meetings across continents, Rahul stayed close to home, making sure their mother got to her appointments. Making sure no one felt left behind. He was the one who had picked Sundar up from the airport when he came back after his mother's collapse. The one who had driven him through the monsoon, rain slamming against the windshield, saying nothing, but being everything. And now, Sundar was flying toward uncertainty. He looked out the window, but what he saw wasn't the sky. It was a memory. He and Rahul, as boys, barefoot in the alley behind their house, chasing a kite that wasn't even theirs, laughing so hard they couldn't breathe, falling into the dirt, happy just to be brothers. They hadn't said, "I love you" much growing up. Boys like them didn't, but they showed it in the small wordless ways that mattered. And Sundar had always told himself there would be time. Time to say what hadn't been said. Time to thank him. To sit and drink tea without looking at a screen. To ask about his dreams, not just his duties. But now time felt thinner. More fragile. When the plane landed in Chennai, the heat hit him like a wall. It was past midnight, but the air still clung to his skin. A driver met him outside with tired eyes and quiet words. The drive to the hospital was long. Too long. The city looked the same, but felt different. Maybe it was him who had changed. When they reached the hospital, Sundar walked straight past reception. His name opened doors now. A nurse led him through. Corridors that smelled of antiseptic and too many waiting hours. Finally, they stopped at a glass door. "He's in here," she said. "He hasn't woken up." Sundar stepped inside. The room was dim. Machines beeped steadily. His brother lay still, too still. Bandages wrapped around his head. Tubes snaked in and out of his body. One arm was cast in white plaster. Sundar walked to the side of the bed and sat. And for a while, he said nothing. What could he say? His fingers reached for Rahul's hand. It was warm but limp. "Hey," he whispered. "I'm here." The silence answered him. He leaned forward, speaking softly. "Asterisk, you remember when you taught me how to ride a bike? I kept falling, scraped my knees, wanted to quit. You held the seat the whole time and told me to try again. You didn't let go until I was ready." He swallowed hard. "I need you to try again now." He stayed there all night. Doctors came and went. Nurses checked machines. But Sundar didn't leave the chair. As the sun began to rise, casting gold through the blinds, he remembered something else. Something Mia had said not long ago. Build something human. He looked at his brother's face. The bruise beneath his eye. The little twitch at the corner of his mouth. And he realized this was what human looked like. Fragile. Real. Unfiltered. Asterisk. Not a headline. Not a launch. Not a summit speech. A body in a hospital bed, fighting quietly to stay. And he knew then that no platform, no position could replace the people who wait for you when you fall. Asterisk. In the days that followed, Sundar cleared his calendar. Calls were missed. Meetings canceled. A product update delayed. And he didn't care. He sat with his mother in a cafeteria, holding her hand when she trembled. He visited the temple with his father, watching the old man place candles with shaking hands. He answered every text from his nieces and nephews, even the silly ones. He slept in a spare room at the hospital, took his coffee from vending machines, wore the same clothes 3 days in a row. And one morning, just as he was nodding off in the chair again, he heard it. Sundar. The voice was dry, weak, but unmistakable. He jolted upright. "Rahul?" His brother opened one eye. "Groggy, you look like a ghost." Rahul whispered. Sundar laughed, the first real laugh in days, and pressed the nurse call button. "Don't move," he said. "You're going to be okay." Rahul blinked slowly. "What happened?" "You were in an accident," Sundar said. "But you're here." And he came back. His brother looked at him, still dazed. You came back too. Sundar nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I am not going anywhere. When Rahul began to recover, the doctors said it was a miracle and a warning. He would heal, but slowly. He'd need help, presence, patience, and Sundar didn't hesitate. He extended his stay in India, moved back into the family home for a while, took conference calls at night, sat by his brother's side during therapy in the day. One evening, sitting on the porch after dinner, Rahul looked at him and said, "You should go back to London. The world's waiting for you." Sundar shook his head. "The world can wait." His brother smiled. "Maya." Sundar smiled too. "I left something unfinished there." A long pause. Then Rahul said something that Sundar would carry with him forever. "Maybe you left it unfinished because part of you always knew you'd come back. Not just to her, to us, to yourself." Sundar didn't reply. He just looked out at the sky, wide, dark, and open. And in that moment, he didn't feel powerful. He felt present. And that he realized was enough. But just as life seemed to be. Healing. A call came from a number Sundar didn't know. A woman answered when he picked up. Her voice trembled. "Is this Mr. Pichai?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "I'm calling from Eastbridge Community Library in London," she said. "Maya asked us to reach out. Something's happened." Asterisk the unfinished letter. Moment Sundar heard the woman's voice on the phone. A familiar coldness settled in his chest. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something quieter, heavier, the kind of feeling that comes when a part of you already knows the truth, but your heart hasn't caught up yet. Maya collapsed during a reading session, the woman said gently. "We called for help immediately. She's in the hospital now. She's stable, but weak." Sundar stood by the window of his childhood home, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. Behind him, the voices of his recovering brother and his mother drifted softly through the house, signs of healing, of things returning. But in that moment, those sounds felt distant. Muted. He turned toward the light and whispered, "I'm coming." London was colder this time. When Sundar stepped off the plane, the wind bit through his coat, but he barely noticed. Every step he took was urgent but measured, as if his body understood something his mind hadn't spoken aloud, that this moment was fragile. That rushing wouldn't undo time, and hesitation wouldn't slow what was already unfolding. At the hospital, the corridors felt too white, too sterile. A nurse greeted him with a clipboard and a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sundar followed her down a quiet hallway, past rooms filled with machines and whispers, until she stopped in front of a door. "She's conscious," the nurse said, "but tired." He nodded, then opened the door. Maya lay in the bed, her eyes closed, her face pale beneath the blanket. Sunlight filtered in through the window, casting a soft glow on her hands, which rested gently on her chest. On the table beside her was a single book, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and a folded piece of paper. He stepped closer. She stirred. "You're here," she whispered, her voice thin but steady. "Always," he said. Sitting beside her, a silence passed between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of the things they didn't need to say anymore. The old weight of unfinished stories had softened. This was something different, not a reunion, but a resting place. "They said you collapsed," Sundar said softly. She nodded. "It was just exhaustion. Stress. The doctor said I've been pushing too hard." He reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. "I should have been here sooner," he said. "No," she replied. "You came when it mattered." He looked at her, searching her face, trying to read the years he had missed. "Why didn't you ever hate me?" "Yes." She turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. "Because you never stopped trying," she said, "even when you didn't know how." His grip tightened slightly around her fingers. "I never stopped thinking about you." She smiled. "I know." Another silence. And then she said, "There's something on the table." He picked up the folded paper. It was creased and yellowing, the ink slightly faded. "What is it?" "A letter," she said. "The last one I wrote. I never sent it. I kept it with me. Sundar unfolded it. Slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Careful. Honest. It read, Dear Sundar, I don't know where this letter will find you. Maybe you're in a tall building somewhere. Maybe you've built the future already. I hope so. But I also hope you remember the boy who used to stand outside the photocopy shop pretending to wait for a bus. I hope you remember how to slow down. If we never meet again, let this be the last thing I say. You were never lost. Just busy. But I believe you'll find your way back. And when you do, maybe I'll still be here. Love, Maya Sundar held the letter against his chest for a long moment. Why didn't you send it? He asked. She looked out the window, because I was afraid I'd already become a memory. He leaned closer. You never were, and you never will be. She smiled, her eyes full, then read it to me again. He did. Slowly, carefully, like scripture. Maya recovered in the weeks that followed. But everything changed after that night. Sundar canceled 3 keynote speeches, turned down 2 new board appointments, and took a small apartment in London, just 10 minutes from the library. He returned to the community space every Sunday. Not as a speaker, not as a CEO. As a volunteer. He read to children. Filed books. Cleaned shelves. Listened. He and Maya never labeled what they were now. It didn't need words. Sometimes they shared tea without speaking. Sometimes they argued over which story to read aloud. Sometimes they walked in silence through rainy streets. And one day, sitting in the library's back room with a pile of returned books, Maya said, the world sees you as a giant. He looked up from the stack in his lap, and what do you see? She smiled. Someone who learned how to kneel. Years later, when Sundar was asked in another interview, a quieter one, not televised, just a small podcast with a young journalist, they asked again, what was your greatest achievement? He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, showing up. Showing up where? The host asked. Sundar smiled. At the hospital when my mother collapsed. At my brother's bedside. At a library in London. At every moment that could have passed me by if I hadn't finally understood what matters. And when the host asked what he would say to the young people who saw him as a symbol of success, he said, don't wait for a wake-up call. Answer the first one. He paused, especially if it's from someone you love, and somewhere in a small room lined with books and laughter and second chances. Maya placed another letter in a drawer, not a goodbye this time. A beginning, because some stories aren't about power. They're about presence. They're about the moments we almost miss and the people we come back for. Asterisk.